You wake up before sunrise, alone, outside the town walls. Nobody lives near you by choice. Today you kill a man in front of a crowd of hundreds, and tomorrow you'll set his cousin's broken arm for a coin. Nobody in town will sit at your table, drink from your cup, or let their children touch your hand. And yet, when they're sick, dying, or need a tooth pulled, you're the first person they call. How does one man become both the most feared and the most needed person in the entire city? Let's start with the job itself. In most German towns from the 1400s to the 1700s, every city needed exactly one executioner, and almost nobody wanted the position. It paid well, a fixed salary plus a fee for every execution, but it came with a legal label attached to your entire family. Unehrlich. Dishonorable. Not a crime, a status. It meant you couldn't join a guild, testify in court, or be buried in the churchyard with everyone else. Your children inherited that same status the day they were born, whether they ever picked up a sword or not. Most executioners came from executioner families because almost no one else would marry into the job or learn the trade voluntarily. In 1573, a 19-year-old named Franz Schmidt took over his father's post in Bamberg, Germany. He kept a diary for 45 years, and that diary survives today. It lists 361 executions and 345 floggings and brandings, each one dated, named, and described in his own hand. Because of Franz Schmidt, we know exactly what this job demanded. Beheading was considered the honorable death, reserved mostly for nobles and citizens. One clean strike with a two-handed sword, no block, no kneeling on a stump. The condemned knelt upright, and the executioner had to judge the angle, the timing, and the exact moment of stillness in a crowd of screaming, praying onlookers. A clean strike took seconds. A botched one could take 3 or 4 swings, and the crowd would remember your name for the wrong reason. In 1600, an executioner in Zurich named Hans Zumbrunn missed his first 2 strikes on a woman named Anna Müller. The council fined him and nearly stripped him of his post. A shaking hand didn't just mean embarrassment. It meant a longer, more painful death for the person in front of you, and the crowd never forgot which executioner's hand shook. Beheading was the easy part of the job. Breaking on the wheel, reserved for the worst crimes, meant striking each limb in a set order with an iron bar, then weaving the body through the spokes. It required anatomical knowledge most physicians of the time didn't have. You had to know exactly where bone would break clean and where it wouldn't. That knowledge is exactly why executioners became the medical resource for the poor. University-trained physicians were expensive and treated wealthy patients. The executioner already understood bones, joints, wounds, and how the body failed, because his other job was studying exactly that. Franz Schmidt's diary records him setting bones, treating wounds, and prescribing remedies for townspeople who had nowhere else to turn. People who wouldn't let him inside their homes socially still lined up outside his door for treatment. The same hands that ended a life on Tuesday reset a shoulder on Wednesday, and both jobs paid the same household. This wasn't a contradiction to the people living it, it was simply how the job worked. But the isolation was real and constant. Executioners had to wear identifying clothing in some cities, couldn't enter certain taverns, and in parts of France, the executioner's family was required to shop only after the market bell rang, when the freshest goods were already gone. The Sanson family of France held the position for 4 straight generations, starting in 1688, passing the sword and the isolation down with the same certainty as a surname. Charles Henri Sanson, born into that family in 1739, performed nearly 3,000 executions across his career, including some of the most famous names of the French Revolution. He didn't choose most of the people he executed. The state chose them, and delivered the order, and Sanson carried it out, the way his father and grandfather had before him. Refusing wasn't really an option. The post was hereditary in practice, and stepping away meant losing the only trade your family was legally permitted to work, since every other guild in the city was closed to you by law. So the job stayed in the family, generation after generation, because the family had nowhere else to go. And yet inside that isolation, some executioners became genuinely skilled. Franz Schmidt eventually petitioned the emperor directly, asking to have his family's dishonorable status removed after decades of service. In 1620, the emperor granted it. Franz Schmidt died an honorable citizen, something almost no executioner before him had achieved. He spent his final years practicing medicine openly, respected, in the same town that once wouldn't let him sit at its tables. What his diary shows, more than anything, is a man who treated the job as a craft. He noted which strikes worked cleanly and which didn't. He recorded which remedies helped patients and which failed. He treated precision as mercy in both halves of his work. By the late 1700s, executions became less frequent across German and French territories, and the hereditary trade began to fade. New laws in the 1800s stripped away the unehrlich status entirely, and the families who had carried that word for centuries were finally just citizens. The sword went into a museum case. The medical satchel went with it. Two tools that once belonged to the same isolated hands, now behind the same pane of glass.